when a desperate young girl broke through security at a Hollywood gala, clutching Keanu Reeves' hand with tears in her eyes. No one could have guessed the shocking truth she was about to reveal. What began as a glamorous evening soon turned into a heartfelt fight for justice, reminding us all that true heroes don't just exist on the big screen. As the lights of the grand Hollywood gala shimmered like stars brought to earth, the crowd's attention was fixed on the elegance and charm of its A-list attendees. Keanu Reeves, with his quiet confidence and warm demeanor, moved through the room like a calming presence amidst the glamour and noise. But then, something unexpected shattered the carefully curated perfection of the evening. A young girl, barely 10 years old, pushed past the towering security guards, her small frame trembling but her resolve unshaken. She ran straight to Keanu, clutching his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and all eyes turned to the man who was now kneeling to meet her at eye level, his gentle voice asking, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" What she said next left the room in stunned silence. "Please, don't let him take me back," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with an unmistakable fear. It wasn't the kind of fear you see in a child who has lost their way. It was something far deeper, the kind of fear that comes from living a life no child should ever have to endure. Keanu's warm expression shifted, concern clouding his face. In that moment, the Hollywood star became something far greater, a protector, ready to stand up for a girl who had no one else to turn to. Before we dive into the heart of this powerful story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of kindness to change lives, hit that like button right now. This story is about to take you on an emotional journey that proves the smallest acts of courage can lead to the biggest changes. As whispers spread through the crowd and the cameras flashed relentlessly, Keanu carefully shielded the girl from the public gaze. With a quiet yet firm voice, he assured her, "You're safe now, I promise." Little did anyone know, this simple act of compassion would unravel a series of events that would expose a dark truth hidden in plain sight and bring an entire room of Hollywood's elite to tears. Keanu's steady hand rested gently on the young girl's shoulder as he led her to a quieter corner away from the prying eyes of cameras and curious onlookers. The glittering chandeliers and soft jazz music of the gala faded into the background, replaced by the heavy silence between them. He crouched down to her level again, his voice soft yet steady. "What's your name?" he asked, offering her a kind smile in an attempt to ease her obvious fear. "Ella," she whispered, her wide eyes darting nervously around the room. "Please, I can't go back to him." Keanu felt a pang in his chest at the raw desperation in her voice. "Ella, you're safe now," he reassured her, his tone calm but firm. "Can you tell me what happened? Why don't you want to go back?" He could see her small hands trembling as she clutched the fabric of her worn cardigan. She hesitated, biting her lip as tears welled up in her eyes. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, she began to speak. "He hurts me," Ella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My stepdad. He hurts me and my mom. Every time I try to hide, he finds me. Every time I try to tell someone, he says no one will believe me. He says I deserve it." Her words came in halting sobs, each one cutting deeper into Keanu's heart. He stayed silent, letting her find the courage to continue, his reassuring presence grounding her in the moment. Ella's eyes filled with tears as she continued, her voice growing stronger, though her pain was palpable. "Last week, he hit my mom so hard she couldn't get up for hours. And me, he says it's my fault when she cries. He makes me wear jackets to cover the bruises so no one can see. But it hurts, Mr. Reeves. It hurts so much." Keanu's jaw tightened, his calm exterior barely masking the storm of anger and heartbreak brewing inside him. He knew he needed to stay composed for Ella's sake. "Ella," he said gently, his voice unwavering, "you did the right thing by telling me. No one has the right to hurt you or your mom, no matter what they say. Do you understand that?" She nodded hesitantly, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her cardigan. In that moment, Keanu's resolve solidified. He wasn't just going to comfort her, he was going to protect her. Glancing around, he discreetly motioned for a security guard. "I need you to alert the authorities," he said quietly but firmly, "and find out if there's any way we can locate her mother." The guard nodded, quickly stepping away to follow Keanu's instructions. Turning back to Ella, Keanu leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ella, do you know where your mom is right now?" She shook her head, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "She's here somewhere," she said. He told her to stay in a room so she wouldn't cause any trouble. "But I don't know where." Keanu reached out and took her small hand in his gaze steady and full of compassion. "We're going to find her, and we're going to make sure both of you are safe. I promise you, Ella, you're not alone in this anymore." For the first time, Ella's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was hope. Keanu held her gaze, silently vowing to be the protector she so desperately needed. What he didn't know was that the truth Ella had just shared would soon unravel a web of secrets far darker than anyone in the room could have imagined. The atmosphere in the gala shifted as whispers spread like wildfire. Guests, dressed in their finest, began to sense that something unusual was unfolding. The grandeur of the chandeliers and the soft melodies of the jazz band seemed almost irrelevant now. All eyes turned toward the corner where Keanu Reeves was still crouched beside Ella, his protective stance unmistakable. It was a moment of quiet tension, soon to be shattered. The sudden sound of firm footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor, cutting through the hum of the crowd. The tall, sharply dressed man with piercing eyes and a forced, calculated smile made his way toward them. It was Martin, Ella's stepfather. His presence was imposing, and his voice, though measured, carried an edge of menace as he called out, "There you are, Ella. I've been looking for you everywhere." Ella's small frame stiffened immediately. She instinctively moved closer to Keanu, her fingers gripping the sleeve of his jacket as if it were the only thing tethering her to safety. Keanu stood up slowly, his calm demeanor masking the protective fire burning within him. "Martin, I presume," he said, his voice steady and low. Martin's smile faltered for a split second before he extended a hand, attempting to mask his irritation. "That's right," he replied smoothly. "Thank you for looking after my stepdaughter. She has a habit of wandering off." His words were carefully chosen, but there was a sharpness to them that didn't go unnoticed. Keanu didn't move to shake his hand. Instead, his piercing gaze held Martin's, unwavering and full of unspoken understanding. "Ella's been very brave tonight," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "She told me some things that concern me deeply." Martin's expression darkened, though he quickly replaced it with another forced smile. "Children and their imaginations," he said dismissively. "She probably misunderstood something. Now, if you don't mind, I'll take her home. We've already caused enough of a scene." He reached for Ella's arm, but before he could touch her, Keanu stepped between them, his voice firm now. "She's not going anywhere with you." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the tension escalated. All pretense of civility dropped from Martin's face. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Reeves, step aside, or you'll regret it." Keanu stood his ground, unfazed. "And you have no idea how many people have already heard what Ella had to say," he replied, tilting his head slightly toward the onlookers. "Do you really think anyone here is going to ignore this?" Martin's jaw tightened as he glanced around, realizing the gravity of the situation. The cameras, the whispers, the judging eyes, all of it was turning against him. "She's my stepdaughter," he hissed. "This is a family matter. Stay out of it." Before Keanu could respond, Ella's trembling voice cut through the tension. "No!" she cried, her voice cracking but strong enough to carry. "It's not just my problem anymore. You always say no one will believe me, but I know they will. I know he will. She looked up at Keanu with tear-filled eyes, her bravery shining through the fear. Martin froze, his composure unraveling. The crowd, silent until now, began to murmur louder, their voices filled with shock and disbelief. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Ella's shoulder, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Ella, you've been so strong. You don't have to hide anymore. Tell them what you told me." Ella took a deep, shaky breath, her small hands clenched into fists as she stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "He hurts me. He hurts my mom. He says it's my fault. He says no one will believe me." She pulled up the sleeve of her cardigan, revealing fresh bruises lining her arm. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, louder this time. "But I'm telling the truth, and I don't want to go back with him." The room fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, capturing every tear, every word, every tremble in Ella's voice. Martin's face contorted with rage, his mask of charm now completely gone. "She's lying," he spat, his voice rising. "She's always been a troublemaker, making up stories to get attention." Keanu's voice, calm but cutting, interrupted him. "If that's the case, why does she have those bruises? Why does she know fear that no child should know?" He stepped closer to Martin, his eyes locked onto the man's. "You've already lost, Martin, and I'm going to make sure Ella and her mom never have to live in fear again." At that moment, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, their wailing growing louder as they neared the venue. Security guards stepped forward, flanking Martin on either side. He struggled to maintain his composure, his threats now desperate and hollow. "You'll regret this, Reeves," he hissed. "You've just made an enemy you can't afford." Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to Ella, kneeling beside her once more. "You're safe now," he said softly. "He won't hurt you or your mom ever again." Ella threw her arms around him, tears of relief streaming down her face. It was a moment that silenced the entire room, a moment of courage, protection, and undeniable humanity. As Martin was escorted out by police, the crowd began to applaud, their quiet murmurs turning into a roar of support. Keanu, still holding Ella's hand, looked toward the officers and said, "Find her mother. She deserves to know they're safe now." And with those words, the tide turned, not just for Ella and her mom, but for everyone watching. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are those who will stand up for what's right. The sirens outside faded into the background as the police worked swiftly. Officers moved with purpose through the ornate halls of the gala, their search for Ella's mother turning the once glamorous atmosphere into a tense flurry of activity. Keanu stayed by Ella's side, his steady presence a shield against the chaos. She clung to him, her small hand gripping his tightly as though afraid he might disappear. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The room's ambient noise of murmured voices and shuffling footsteps seemed to grow louder with every second. Then, through the open doors, a voice rang out. "We found her!" An officer's shout cut through the tension like a ray of sunlight piercing storm clouds. Ella's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide with hope. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded toward the doorway. "Let's go see her," he said softly. Together, they walked toward the hall, the world around them blurring as Ella's focus narrowed to the figure being led forward by the officers. Claire Langham looked as if she had been through a war. Her elegant dress was wrinkled, her makeup smudged, and her eyes carried the weight of years spent in fear. But when her gaze landed on Ella, everything else seemed to fall away. "Ella!" she cried, her voice breaking as she rushed forward. Ella ran to her mother, colliding into her arms with a force that sent them both stumbling back. "Mom!" Ella sobbed, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "I was so scared. I thought I'd never see you again." Claire held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you." I should have done more. Keanu stood a few feet away, his chest tight as he watched the reunion. The scene was raw and unfiltered, a mother and daughter finding each other again after years of pain. As Claire looked up, her tear-filled eyes met Keanu's. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, but then she spoke, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for saving her, for saving us." Keanu shook his head, his expression gentle. "Ella saved herself," he replied. "She was brave enough to speak up. I just listened." Claire smiled weakly, still clutching Ella as though afraid to let go. "You did more than listen," she said. "You believed her when no one else did. That's something I'll never forget." Ella pulled back slightly, looking up at her mother with a newfound sense of courage. "We don't have to go back, right, Mom? He can't hurt us anymore." Claire's voice broke as she cupped her daughter's face. "No, sweetheart, we're never going back. Never again." She turned to the officers, her expression hardening with resolve. "I want to press charges, whatever it takes. I want him to be held accountable for everything he's done." The lead officer nodded. "We'll make sure he faces justice," he assured her. "And we'll connect you with resources to help you start over." Ella looked back at Keanu, her eyes filled with gratitude that seemed far too mature for her young age. "Are you going to leave now?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with both sadness and understanding. Keanu knelt down, meeting her gaze directly. "Ella, I'm not going anywhere just yet," he said. "You and your mom are going to be okay, and if you ever need anything, you can always reach out to me." Tears welled up in Ella's eyes again, but this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, hope, and something she hadn't felt in a long time, safety. She threw her arms around Keanu, holding him tightly as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Thank you for being my hero." Keanu hugged her back, his voice quiet but steady. "You're the hero here, Ella. Never forget that." As the officers prepared to escort Claire and Ella to a safer location, the room seemed to breathe again. Guests, who had been frozen in place moments before, now exchanged looks of admiration and respect. Keanu stood tall, his gaze following Ella and her mother as they walked away, hand in hand. The weight of the evening lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that something truly meaningful had happened. A man in the crowd stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. "What you did tonight, it's something none of us will forget." Keanu turned to the man, offering a small, humble smile. "I just did what I hope anyone would do," he replied. As the crowd parted and the lights dimmed, Keanu found himself standing alone for a moment, reflecting on the events of the night. The grandeur of the gala now felt insignificant compared to the courage of a little girl who had dared to ask for help. In that quiet moment, Keanu looked up at the night sky through the glass ceiling, the stars shining brightly above. He let out a long breath, feeling both the weight of what had been done and the hope of what lay ahead. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't the ones fought on screen but the ones fought in real life, with nothing but kindness, courage, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. The days that followed the gala were a whirlwind of media coverage, police reports, and quiet moments of healing. The once luxurious event had become a symbol of something far more profound, a turning point in the lives of Ella and her mother, Claire. News outlets around the world picked up the story, with headlines praising Keanu Reeves for his bravery and compassion. Yet, for Keanu, the spotlight meant little compared to the quiet satisfaction of knowing Ella and Claire were finally safe, in the safety of a temporary shelter provided by the authorities. Claire and Ella began to rebuild their lives. The bruises on Ella's arms faded, but the scars on her heart would take longer to heal. Keanu stayed in touch, discreetly ensuring they had access to legal support, counseling, and a chance at a new beginning. When a high-profile attorney offered to take their case pro bono, Keanu quietly arranged for it, refusing to take any credit. "It's not about me," he told a close friend. It's about them finally getting the justice they deserve. Months passed, and life moved forward. Keanu returned to his work on set, but he carried the memory of that night with him like a quiet fire, fueling his desire to do more. During an interview promoting his latest film, a journalist couldn't help but bring up the incident. "You've been called a hero, Mr. Reeves," she said. "How does that feel?" Keanu paused, his thoughtful eyes reflecting the weight of her words. "I'm not a hero," he replied. "The real heroes are the ones who find the courage to stand up, even when they feel like the world is against them." People like Ella and her mom. The audience applauded, their admiration for him growing not because of his humility but because of his sincerity. Behind the scenes, he began quietly funding programs for victims of domestic abuse, ensuring that Ella and Claire's story wasn't just a singular moment but a catalyst for change. His team never issued press releases or sought public acknowledgement. For Keanu, the work itself was reward enough. One afternoon, several months after the gala, a letter arrived at Keanu's office. It was written in the neat, careful handwriting of a child. The envelope was plain, but the words inside carried a weight that brought him to tears. "Dear Mr. Reeves, thank you for everything you did for me and my mom. We have a new house now, and Mom says we're starting fresh. She smiles more, and I don't feel scared anymore. I started school again, and I even made a friend. None of this would have happened if you hadn't believed me that night. You saved us. Mom says you're an angel, but I think you're a real-life hero. I hope one day I can be as brave as you. Thank you for being there when no one else was. Love, Ella." Keanu read the letter twice, his chest tightening with emotion. He folded it carefully, placing it in the drawer of his desk, a quiet reminder of why he had acted that night. It wasn't for the headlines or the applause. It was for moments like this, for a little girl who had finally found her voice and a mother who had rediscovered her strength. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu stood on the balcony of his home, the city lights glittering like distant stars. In the quiet, he thought of Ella and Claire, of the courage it took for them to leave behind the pain of the past and step into an uncertain but hopeful future. He thought of all the people out there, trapped in silence, waiting for someone to believe them, and he made a vow to keep listening, to keep helping, and to keep standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Sometimes, he reflected, the roles we play in life matter far more than the ones we play on screen. And in those roles, quiet, unscripted, and real, we have the power to change the world, one life at a time.